I never imagined that at 68 years old, I would be carrying moving boxes to an apartment in a completely foreign city. My children thought I had gone crazy. "Mom, you have your house, your friends, your routine in Milwaukee. Why move to Portland now?" my daughter Sarah asked on the phone, with that tone of concern mixed with disapproval that only daughters can have. The truth is, I wasn't even sure of the answer myself. Maybe it was the loneliness that had settled in after Harold passed, away 3 years ago. Or maybe it was the fact that every corner of Milwaukee reminded me of the 50 years we spent together. The coffee shop where we had coffee on Sundays, the park where we walked our golden retriever, even the supermarket where we argued about which brand of cereal to buy. Everything was a constant reminder of what I had lost. When my college friend Linda invited me to visit her in Portland for the summer, I accepted without much thought. I needed some fresh air, literally and figuratively. And Portland surprised me. The city was vibrant, full of life, with its farmers markets, its cozy independent bookstores, and that coffee culture that made Milwaukee seem stuck in time. There was a youthful energy, but at the same time, a respect for the slower pace of life that I, at 68, had begun to appreciate. It was during that 2-week visit that I made the decision. Why not? My children were adults, with their own lives in different states. I had been retired for 5 years. There was nothing holding me back in Milwaukee except memories that, however dear they were, also kept me stuck in a kind of perpetual mourning. So I did the unthinkable. I put my house up for sale, looked for an affordable apartment in a quiet Portland neighborhood called Sellwood, and within 3 months I was driving across the country in my 2010 Honda Civic, with the back seat packed with plants I refused to leave behind, and a playlist of Carole King and Joni Mitchell playing on the radio. The first few months were harder than I expected. Making friends when you're 68 isn't like making friends in college or at work. People already have their established circles, their routines. I found myself going to the same Starbucks every morning, not because the coffee was exceptionally good, but because the baristas started to recognize me, and that made me feel a little less invisible in that new city. It was on one of those October mornings, with the smell of damp leaves in the air and that characteristic fine drizzle of the Pacific Northwest, that everything changed. I was in the coffee line, distractedly looking at my cell phone, when someone behind me commented, "That's an excellent book you're carrying." I looked down. I had forgotten that I was holding my worn copy of Gabriel Garcia Marquez's 100 Years of Solitude, which I was rereading for the 3rd time. I turned around and found a man with gray hair, thick-rimmed glasses, and a genuine smile that lit up his whole face. "Have you read it?" I asked, surprised. It wasn't every day that someone mentioned Latin American literature in a coffee shop line. "I read it a long time ago, when I was in college, in the 70s, he replied. "It was one of the books that made me want to travel through South America, which I eventually did." We chatted for a few minutes there in line, and when it was my turn to order, he insisted on paying for my latte. "Anyone who reads Marquez deserves a free coffee," he said, with a mischievous glint in his eye. His name was Thomas, but everyone called him Tom. He was 72 years old, a retired history professor, and also relatively new to Portland, having moved from Seattle 2 years earlier after his wife passed away from cancer. We exchanged phone numbers, almost shyly, like teenagers, and he suggested we meet again, perhaps for a quieter coffee where we could really talk. I said yes, and then I regretted it. And then I got excited. And then I panicked. I called Sarah that night, needing to talk to someone. "Mom, this is wonderful," she exclaimed to my surprise. "You deserve company. You deserve to be happy." "But what about your father?" I asked, my voice trembling. There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Mom," Sarah said softly, "Dad passed away 3 years ago. He loved you and would never have wanted you to be alone forever. You're 68, not 88. You still have a lot of life ahead of you." Sarah's words echoed in my mind for days afterward. Was I betraying Harold's memory by agreeing to have coffee with another man? Was I being ridiculous, acting like a teenager with all this anxiety? Our first proper meeting was at a small coffee shop called Paleo Coffee near the Willamette River. It was a Saturday morning, and Portland was living up to its reputation as one of the rainiest cities in the country. I arrived 15 minutes early, my heart pounding so hard I was sure everyone in the coffee shop could hear it. Tom showed up right on time, shaking the rain off his navy blue raincoat. When our eyes met, he smiled that warm smile that had captivated me in the Starbucks line. We talked for 4 hours. 4 hours that felt like 40 minutes. We talked about our lives, our marriages, the pain of loss, the strangeness of starting over in a new city in old age. Tom told me about his years as a teacher, about the trips he took with his wife, Margaret, through Europe and South America. I talked about my career as a librarian, about raising 3 children while working, about my love of gardening, which Harold never fully understood, but always supported. There was no discomfort, no awkward silences. It was like meeting an old friend you hadn't seen in years, but with whom the connection remains intact. When we finally left the coffee shop, the rain had stopped and a shy sun was trying to pierce the clouds. Tom offered to walk me to my car, and along the way, he remarked, "No, Dorothy, I didn't expect moving to Portland to bring me anything more than a change of scenery. But meeting you was a genuinely pleasant surprise." My name is Dorothy, by the way, Dorothy Ann Peterson. I always hated it when people called me Dot, but when Tom occasionally used that nickname in the following weeks, somehow it didn't bother me. We started seeing each other regularly, always casually at first, coffees, walks through Washington Park, visits to Portland's famous farmers, markets where we bought fresh apples and artisanal cheeses. Tom introduced me to the world of Oregon wines, something completely new to me, as I've always been more of a tea drinker. I took him to the used bookstores in Selwood, where we spent hours searching for hidden literary treasures. It was gradual, this transformation from acquaintances to friends to something more. There wasn't a specific moment when I realized I was falling in love. It was more like waking up one day and realizing that the first thing I wanted to do was call Tom and tell him about something interesting I had read or seen. It was wanting to hear his voice, his deep laugh when I told him some funny story about my grandchildren. However, with those feelings came guilt. One night, alone in my apartment, I looked at the wedding photo of Harold and me that I still kept on my bedside table. We were 23 and 25 years old in that photo, with our whole lives ahead of us. Tears streamed down my face. "Sorry," I whispered to the camera. "Sorry, but I feel so alone sometimes." It was Tom who, unknowingly, helped me with this guilt. We were sitting in his apartment, drinking wine and listening to soft jazz in the background when he started talking about Margaret. "You know," he said, looking at his glass, "for a long time, I felt guilty for being happy again, for laughing, for enjoying a sunset, for wanting company. It felt like a betrayal somehow. As if being happy meant I didn't love her enough that I had forgotten about her." "And what has changed?" I asked gently. My therapist asked me a simple question. If the roles were reversed and Margaret had survived, would you want her to spend the rest of her life alone and sad? And I realized that I wouldn't. I would have wanted her to be happy, to find companionship, to live life to the fullest. And then I realized that she probably felt the same way about me. Those words were liberating. I began to understand that loving, again, didn't erase the love I had for Harold. The human heart isn't a cup that, once full, can't hold anything more. It expands, accommodates, grows. It was in December, during the Christmas season, that Tom officially asked me to be his girlfriend. We were at the Portland Christmas market, walking among the stalls selling hot chocolate and handcrafted ornaments, when he stopped, took my gloved hand and said, "Dorothy, I know we're too old to play games. I like you. A lot. And I was wondering if you would consider us being exclusive, officially dating, or whatever we call it at our age. I laughed. I laughed so hard that some people looked. And then I said yes. My children had mixed reactions. Sarah was genuinely happy for me. My oldest son, Robert, was reserved but polite. My youngest daughter, Jennifer, was blunt. Mom, you barely know this man. What if he's after your money? I had to gently explain that at 68, living on retirement and Social Security, I didn't exactly have a fortune to be stolen. Besides, Tom was financially comfortable with his own retirement. We weren't two impulsive young people. We were two adults with decades of life experience who had found connection and companionship in each other. What people don't tell you about dating when you're older is that in many ways, it's better than when you're young. There are no games, no pretenses. You know yourself, you know what you want and what you don't want. There's no pressure to look perfect or hide your imperfections. Tom saw my wrinkles, my gray hair that I refused to dye, my body that bears the marks of 3 pregnancies and 68 years of life. And yet, when he looked at me, I felt beautiful. Of course, it wasn't all perfect. We had our challenges. Tom had a complicated relationship with his adult children who were still processing their mother's death and weren't ready to accept that he had moved on. This caused tension at times. I had my own insecurities, moments when I wondered if it was fair to Tom to be with someone who still kept photos of her late husband around the house. But we talked about everything. That's the beauty of relationships and maturity. You're past the years of dramatic fights and slamming doors. You've learned that communication is everything. One of the most important conversations we had was about the future. We were lying on his sofa, me reading a book and him doing a crossword puzzle from the Sunday paper, when he suddenly asked, "Dorothy, where? Do you see yourself in 5 years?" I bookmarked my page and thought, honestly, I hope I'm still here in Portland, healthy, maybe doing more traveling. I'd love to visit the Oregon coast, maybe even go to Canada. And I hope to still have you in my life, Tom, whatever form that takes. What do you mean by whatever form it takes? He asked, taking off his glasses to look directly at me. Well, I said carefully, we're not getting any younger. The reality is that health problems, life, changes, all of that is part of what's to come. I just want to say that regardless of what the future brings, I'm grateful for this time we have together. Tom nodded slowly. Me too. But I'll be honest with you, Dot. I'd like us to consider making this more permanent. I'm not necessarily talking about marriage, but maybe living together? Sharing a place? My heart raced. Tom, this is a big step. I know, he said. And it doesn't have to be now. But think about it. We both maintain 2 apartments. We both spend so much time at each other's homes. It makes sense financially, but more than that, it makes sense emotionally. I want to wake up with you every morning, not just on weekends. That conversation stayed on my mind for weeks. I had a long talk with Sarah, who surprised me by saying, "Mom, you're an adult. If it makes you happy and you feel it's the right thing to do it. Life is too short not to follow your heart, especially at this stage." I talked to Linda, my friend, who had indirectly been responsible for all this change by inviting me to Portland. "For God's sake, Dorothy," she said, "when are you going to stop living like you need everyone's permission to be happy? Do what your heart is telling you." And my heart was saying, yes. In March, a year after we met in that coffee queue, Tom and I decided to look for a place to live together. We found a charming little house in Selwood, with a back garden that I could finally turn into my plant sanctuary, and an office where Tom could keep his books and write the memoirs he'd always wanted to write about his years as a teacher. We combined our furniture, her bookshelves with my plant collection, her travel photos with my family photos, and we discovered that our lives fit together with surprising ease, like 2 puzzle pieces that didn't know they belonged in the same picture. The change wasn't entirely smooth. There were arguments over silly things, like where to put the sofa or who would be responsible for which household chore. There was an adjustment period, getting used to each other's habits. Tom discovered that I'm not exactly a morning person, while I discovered that he snores lightly, a sound that, surprisingly, I found comforting. But the challenges were small compared to the joys. The joy of having someone to talk to over breakfast. The security of knowing that if something happened, someone was there. The simple intimacy of cooking together, watching the evening. News sharing a blanket, planning little weekend outings. What was also unexpected was how our social life flourished. Through Tom, I met his friends from the book club and the photography class he attended. Through me, he joined the local library's volunteer group. Suddenly, Portland was no longer a city where I was a stranger. It was a home, with a community, with people who knew me and cared. There were difficult times, of course. During a visit from Jennifer, she made a cutting comment about how I had replaced her father so quickly. It took several frank conversations and eventually a family therapy session to help her understand that Tom wasn't a replacement, but a new chapter. Harold would always have his place in my heart and in my story, but life goes on, and I had the right to move on with it. Tom's children also had their difficulties. His oldest son refused to visit us for months. It was painful for Tom, and all I could do was be there for him, listen, offer comfort, without trying to solve something that was beyond my control. But slowly, very slowly, things improved. Jennifer began to see how I was lighter, happier. Tom's son eventually came for dinner, and, although tense, it was a start. Now, when I look back on that day, I made the crazy decision to move to Portland at 68. I can hardly believe the whole journey. I came here seeking an escape from memories, perhaps a fresh start. What I found was so much more than that. Yes, I found love again, but I also found myself. I found courage I didn't know I had. I found the ability to start over, even when it seems too late. I learned that love isn't an exclusive privilege of the young, that the heart can open again even after being broken by loss. Tom and I aren't naive. We know our time together is precious precisely because we understand its finite nature. We don't waste time on silly arguments or wounded pride. We say, I love you every day. We celebrate the little things, a good meal, a beautiful sunset, a shared laugh. A few days ago, we were in the garden, me planting tulips for spring and Tom reading beside me, when he suddenly said, "You know I'm the luckiest man in the world, right?" I looked at him, with dirt on his hands and probably on his face too. Why? Because I was lucky enough to find true love twice in my life. How many people can say that? His words moved me, but they also made me reflect. He was right. We both had that extraordinary luck. And it wasn't just luck. It was also a choice. The choice to remain open, vulnerable, hopeful, even after the loss. The choice to believe that life still had more to offer. If there's one thing I wish people knew about finding love later in life, it's this. It's never too late. You're not betraying the memory of someone you've lost by opening your heart again. You're not foolish or ridiculous for wanting companionship, intimacy, connection. Love at any age is valid, it's precious, it's transformative. And if you're thinking it's too late for you, that you've already had your chance, that your best years are behind you, I'm here to tell you, stop that. Your best years are the ones you're living now and the ones that are yet to come. I moved to Portland at 68 looking for a fresh start. I found a rebirth. And if Tom is reading this over my shoulder right now, as he probably is, I want him to know. Thank you. Thank you for coming into my life when I least expected it. Thank you for making me believe in love again. And thank you for every ordinary and extraordinary day we've shared. At 69 years old, I discovered that life can, in fact, begin again. And perhaps that's the secret we only learn with time. As long as there is life, there is possibility. As long as there is a beating heart, there is hope. And as long as there is hope, there is always, always the chance to find love again. Portland, with its constant rain and independent spirit, gave me more than just a new city to call home. It gave me a new life. And for that, I will be eternally grateful. Today, at 70 years old, I wake up every day next to Tom and feel a deep gratitude for having had the courage to start over. Our routine is simple but full of meaning. We have coffee together in the garden when the weather permits. We read the newspaper side by side. We plan small adventures like a trip to the coast or a visit to a new winery. I keep in regular contact with my children and grandchildren, who now come to visit us in Portland. Seeing my grandchildren playing in the garden I planted while Tom teaches them about American history with his characteristic teacher-like patience fills my heart in a way I can't describe. They affectionately call him Grandpa Tom, a title he accepts with pride and emotion. Tom's children also grew closer. It didn't happen overnight, but it did happen. Last Thanksgiving, we all got our families together for the first time. It was chaotic, noisy, sometimes uncomfortable, but it was family. And it was beautiful. I still go to that same coffee shop where we met, the Starbucks that became the setting for the beginning of our story. Sometimes we go together, order our coffees, and laugh remembering that first chance encounter. The baristas already know our story and always greet us with warm smiles. I learned that life doesn't end after a great loss. It transforms, and if you allow it, if you have the courage to remain open to possibilities, life can surprise you in ways you never imagined. My move to Portland at 68 wasn't just a geographical change. It was a declaration that I was still alive, still had dreams, still deserved love and happiness. It was an act of faith in myself and in the future. And if you're reading this and wondering if it's too late to start over, to pursue that postponed dream, to open your heart again, let me tell you with absolute certainty, it's not. It's never too late to write a new chapter in your story. Tom often asks me if I regret anything, and the only thing I regret is not having done it sooner. But maybe the right time was exactly when it happened. Maybe I needed those 3 years of mourning to truly appreciate this second chance at happiness. Life continues to surprise Tom and me. We're planning a trip to Europe next year, visiting places we've always dreamed of seeing. We're living, not just existing, and that, I've discovered, makes all the difference. If this story touched your heart, please like this video. It helps me continue sharing inspiring stories like this one. And if you're not yet subscribed to the channel, click the subscribe button so you don't miss future stories about new beginnings, love, and courage. Now I want to know from you. What city are you from? Have you ever thought about starting over in a new place? Share in the comments. I love reading your stories and experiences. See you in the next story.